me up, but thank you so much. What a pleasure it is to be here with you. I want to thank my friend Herb London, the President Emeritus of the Hudson Institute, a trustee of the Harbor League, and all in all, one of New York's most esteemed academics and policy analysts, as well as the London Center for Policy Research, for inviting me to give some brief remarks. I'm so glad that I'm joined by my colleague on our Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Joe Wilson of South Carolina. The Palmetto State, is that it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
We're the Sunshine State. But in an era when we are bombarded with many foreign policy challenges, the threat posed by nuclear weapons in the hands of rogue regimes or terrorists must be at the top of the list. The issue of nuclear proliferation is nowhere more important than in the Middle East, where turmoil and upheaval is fast becoming the new normal. The world's attention, of course, is focused on Iran and its rapidly advancing nuclear weapons program. You're all aware of the extraordinary damage and dangers that an Iran armed with those weapons would pose, not only to the United States, but to our allies, especially our democratic ally, the Jewish state of Israel, and the world as a whole. We must continue to work with responsible nations to do what we can to stop the Iranian nuclear program before it can have the impact that we fear it could. But all of us are hoping that the sanctions that the West has imposed, years too late, I might add, years too late, will force the regime to recalculate. We in Congress have been pressing the administration to take more forceful action against Iran by passing the bill that we've set forth, H.R. 1905, which is the Iran Threat Reduction in Syria Human Rights Act, which I introduced and was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Signed it into law, but it has really yet to be implemented fully as it should. The expanded sanctions that have been put into place, you can feel already the pain that it has caused the Iranian regime, and that is good. But so much more needs to be done. That is just a little bit that the sanctions can do. It cannot be said that Congress has not acted in a decisive way to try to stop the Iranian menace, but with all of the attention on Iran, it's easy to overlook the larger problem, which is the threat of nuclear weapons capability spreading to more and more countries, especially in the Middle East. And it's not a theoretical problem. We know that Iraq and Syria had extensive nuclear weapons programs, despite the fact that they were signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. Thank goodness Israel destroyed one of the facilities in Iraq in 1981. They got a lot of international condemnation for it, but we were so glad that that happened. And then again, in Syria, they did the same in 2007 in that underground nuclear reactor that they were building with North Korea. But the problem is growing, it's expanding as nuclear technology spreads throughout the region in the guise of what they say is peaceful uses of nuclear power. But it's odd that countries sitting on oceans of oil and boundless supplies of natural gas feel the need to invest huge sums into the nuclear electricity generation. Occasionally, however, there is a slip. Last year, the former Saudi Arabian intelligence chief and ambassador to the United States said publicly that his country was open to the possibility of acquiring nuclear weapons, and we can expect that more and more to be said of all of the countries in the region. It's easy to imagine this domino effect of one country after another in the region attempting to acquire nuclear weapons capability, pointing to the example and the threat of countries doing the same thing. And a major barrier preventing that is that only a very few countries, only few countries possess the necessary technology, the expertise, and the materials needed. But it is very likely to happen. That's why it's so disturbing to see country after country, from France to Russia, eager to sell these inherently dangerous exports to any willing buyer. And sadly, the prospect of billions and billions of dollars has led U.S. companies and even our own government to champion the spread of these programs in the Middle East in pursuit of sales. And they say this is good for the economy. This will produce jobs, but at what cost? To enhance these safeguards against this reckless behavior, I and a number of my colleagues introduced a bill, H.R. 1280, which is to amend the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 to prevent nuclear cooperation agreements between the United States and other countries from being used to advance the proliferation of nuclear weapons capability. It will strengthen the ability of Congress to stop civil nuclear cooperation agreements that did not meet a number of basic safeguards required to prevent the spread of technology, prevent the spread of materials and expertise that could be used for weapons. It would require, before the United States signed a nuclear cooperation agreement, that the other country commit to foregoing the manufacture of nuclear fuel, which is readily available on the world market. And this bill is fully consistent with the President's non-proliferation strategy that he announced in Prague in April of 2009. And it is time that the administration gets serious about halting nuclear proliferation worldwide. And I think our bill is a way to do that, but we've gotten a lot of resistance on our bill. But economic interests are, of course, important. We understand that. But we cannot allow an enthusiastic pursuit of sales to undermine U.S. national security interests, which is what is happening right now. And why would we want to be selling these deadly ingredients to a country which refused to take even the most basic step, the most basic safeguards? Since the tragic events of September 11th, the threat of rogue nations such as Iran and North Korea developing a nuclear weapons capability has grown significantly. But the threat isn't that just that these rogue regimes will develop their own nuclear weapons program, or that their actions will drive other countries in the region to seek their own capabilities. It's also now the threat that these unstable regimes will assist non-state actors and terrorist organizations in acquiring those weapons to use against the United States and the West. That's why we've got to remain vigilant in the United States Congress. That's why we must not allow these rogue nations to achieve their ambitions of having a nuclear program. And that is why you're all here today, to hear from the experts on the nuclear instability in the Middle East and what we can do to stop this dangerous nuclear proliferation from taking place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panel of experts who know far more than we do. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. Thank you for the warm invitation. And Lee Cohen sends his regards.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll leave you in good hands there with Joe Wilson. Don't blow things up while I'm gone, Joe, okay?
You may want to take your
Thank
notes
you.
as well.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
I have to tell you that one of the great figures, one of the great leaders in the House is Congresswoman Layton. She's a remarkable
Very
person
nice.
in so many
Thank
ways.
you.
And one of the lamentable conditions, from my point of view, is that the Republican Party has term limits on its chairmanships. So she will be leaving the chairman's role in the Foreign Relations Committee. But I can only tell you that the legacy will not be forgotten. She has played a very significant role, and the legislation she has sponsored, I think, will have a profound effect on the future.
And I'll
So
be
thank you for
Middle
being
East
with us.
Subcommittee Chair, so I'll still
Oh,
have
terrific.
my finger in there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good luck with your classes. AP.
I'm going to ask
I don't want
each of
any
our
questions from
panelists
you.
to speak
Thank
for
you.
about 10 minutes, and then hopefully you have questions. We'll try to make this as brief and simple and direct as possible. I'd like to start with my friend John Wolstetter, but first, just let me introduce these comments by telling you that in 1937, when there were war clouds on the horizon in Europe, George Orwell said that the first duty of intelligent people is the restatement of the obvious. Now, a lot of this is very obvious. We want to prevent nuclear weapons. But how do we do that? The genie has been taken out of the bottle. These weapons already exist. There are rogue nations like Iran trying to obtain a nuclear capability. We will probably see further proliferation in the Middle East. This is a very dangerous period, and a period that all Americans should be cognizant of. I'd like to start with my friend on my right, John Wallstetter, in part because John has written an extraordinary book, truly extraordinary. It's called Sleepwalking with the Bomb. And what is so interesting about this book is that it gives many illustrations. When the bomb was used, of course during World War II, the ways in which the bomb has played a role in the political sphere, the role of negotiation. John probably knows as much about this as anyone. But I think that the book serves as a very important introduction to this entire conversation. So John, we're going to start with you. 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Is technology working? Can everybody hear me? All right, I think what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of an overview of the topic and then pick out some particularly important points. But what my book actually does is distill a dozen lessons that 2/3 of a century of the nuclear age teach us about nuclear weapons and their issues. When the world learned about the use of atomic energy in warfare, it was a shock practically unprecedented in the history of mankind. And afterwards, there was a great deal of puzzlement as to how to use those weapons. And over the next few decades, the few countries that had them then, and up until the 1960s, there were only three actually, United States, then the Soviet Union, which is now part of which is now Russia, and Great Britain, was how to use these weapons. Did they simply represent a bigger bang in warfare, or did they change things entirely? And what settled that question was not the atomic bombs that exploded at Hiroshima, which explode by splitting the nucleus inside the atoms through what we call fission, but the so-called hydrogen bomb, which used heat energy, thermal energy, to fuse the nuclei of atoms and create 1,000 times more powerful explosions. And that threatened to end civilization. So what to do with this? And for the first 22 years after the 1945 advent of the nuclear age, it was a period of technology, a technology race where new weapons that we're now familiar with, the intercontinental ballistic missile to carry across oceans in 30 minutes, these terrible weapons were developed and the nuclear weapons were put on them, and nuclear submarines to patrol at sea where they were hard to hit. And there were some basic theories of deterrence. There's no time to go into that here, but many of the basic concepts came about in that age. And there was also the most signal event, which is what we're now worried about might occur with Iran in the Mideast, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev placed medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles capable of hitting New York, Chicago, and many other places in Cuba, thinking that President John F. Kennedy would make a deal of some sort and allow them to stay. Instead, Kennedy ordered them to take them out. We came close to a nuclear war there. The details, again, there's no time, but Fidel Castro of Cuba wanted at that time, if his island was invaded, to have an all-out nuclear exchange, even though his own island would disappear and him with it and 6 million, 7 million Cubans. And it's the worry about such a fanatic in Iran that if they get a nuclear bomb, they might take the same view. So we learned things from there, and then we spent about a quarter century up until around 1992 trying arms control to try and find a way, particularly with the Soviet Union, to put a cap on what we called the arms race. We actually began reducing our nuclear weapons in 1967 from 32,000 down to what is today about 5,000. The Russians peaked at 45,000 and thereabouts in 1986, and they're now down to about 9,000 or so. And during this period, some arms agreements worked and some didn't. Just like anything else, there were good or bad agreements. But in the end, at the end of the Cold War, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we walked into a new era. And in this era, the dominant theme has been proliferation, nuclear proliferation by smaller powers that are outside of the traditional system of large states and also maybe not controllable. We have Pakistan, which has a militant Islamic regime, and if the true militants ever take over from the current government, which is bad enough, they have an arsenal that has doubled in the last 5 years to over 100 weapons. India, a raid against Pakistan, of course, didn't explode a weapon until 1998 in a formal test. They did test a small device before that. And North Korea joined the club in 2006 and has a small arsenal that threatens basically South Korea until they build rockets that can go further, a form of survivor's insurance for them. So we come to this age with a background, and there are lessons that can be learned about these things. And one of them is that in terms of nuclear proliferation, one thing that doesn't work, which unfortunately the present administration thinks will work, is setting an example. We started setting an example decades ago. We are the only nuclear power that has not tried to modernize our nuclear forces in the last 20 years. And Pakistan is racing toward a larger arsenal. China's arsenal, they're developing 5 or 6 different types of missiles. It's not something you normally do when you're looking to reduce new nuclear missiles. So you have this situation where there are people looking towards going to global zero in nuclear weapons.